Hey guys, Drag and Drop Coding here. I'm your host, Christian Mishka, and in this video, we're going to learn all about velocity. So, before we had this very harsh movement, your cat either moved and then stopped immediately. That's not very realistic. What we're going to be adding is a smoother movement. It's going to be velocity, okay? So we're going to have to use some variables to figure this out, and yeah, let's just get into it. Let's see if I have that script. Do I have that script? Okay, so here I have that basic, up, down, left, right, WASD movement. I'm just going to fill this in, right? Just to how we had it before. Whoops, using the X and Y. So the Y was 10, minus 10 for down, and then left and right arrows. Whoops, not set. I'm sorry, change. So left would be negative, right would be positive. Okay, so this was our basic movement script. That we did in our four-way movement. You can watch that video if you haven't already. So use WASD or the arrow keys to move your cat around. Very cool, right? And it's kind of harsh. It's kind of like he stops right away or whatever. So we're just going to add some velocity to this. And the way we do that is we create two variables. One for x velocity. I'm just going to call it xvel, xvel. And right now I'm going to do for all sprites. In reality, you probably just want to do it for the sprite that's using it. And we're also going to do y velocity. So x velocity and y velocity. One for the x direction and one for the y direction. Okay? And then the way that we do this is we just change our x and our y at the end by our x and our y velocity, right? So we change our x by the x velocity, change our y by the y velocity. And we don't do any changing of x, we don't do anything to the x in the movement. We do something with the velocity now, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to, for right now, we're just going to set it. So we're going to set it to, let's keep it 10, right? So if we're going up, it's going to be 10, it's going down, negative 10. Same, up and down is y, left and right is still x, right? Because that's how we're changing it down here. So this is going to be x, and this is going to be x. This is going to be negative 10, and this is going to be 10. Okay? Now, you're going to notice something interesting. I can still move up, down, left, right. Looks fine. If I let go, he kind of keeps moving. We don't really want that. We're going to add what's called dampening, okay? So we're going to set our x and our y velocity. Let's just do it for the x first. We're going to set x velocity to itself. That's going to do nothing, right? You can look up here, it's still 10. But if we multiply it by a number, say we multiply it by 1. What is anything times 1? What's 10 times 1? 10. What's 1 times 1? 1. Right? Anything times 1 is itself, so we haven't done anything. If we multiply any number by 0, it's going to be 0, right? So now x is always 0. If 10 times 0 is 0, whatever. The sweet spot is when you get a number between 0 and 1. Right, so if you have 10 times 1, or 10 times a number between those, say 0.5. 10 times 0.5 is 5. 5 times 0.5 is 2.5, right? It keeps getting smaller and smaller. So we want a number between 0 and 1, so it'll make it smaller and smaller. So this is how the dampening, this is called dampening. So let's do 0.9 for starters, and we'll do the same thing for the y, and then we need to change this variable to y velocity. And we'll put that right after. Okay, so you notice the cat is moving very smoothly right now. You can move around up, down, left, right, and then he kind of glides and comes to a stop. That's because we're dampening his movement. Okay, and maybe that's not enough dampening. Maybe you want 0.5, and then he'll stop faster. All right, so he moved. This looks much better. He kind of moves and stops. Okay. Now, to be truthful, we're just setting the y velocity to 10 and then we're dampening it. This is not the ideal way of doing things. Instead, what you want to do is change your y velocity, and this would be called acceleration. So when you move, you accelerate, and then we can cap off that acceleration. So instead of doing all this setting here, I'm going to change that to changing. Okay. So we're going to change, and we're only going to change it by a small number. So we're going to change y velocity by 1, and here we're going to change it by -1. And then we're going to do the same thing for the x velocity. We're going to change this to x and to x and make sure the left is -1. Okay, so now if we run this, if I move right, he should get faster and faster. Okay, but we've got a problem, right? This dampening is changing it by 0.5. So maybe you were not moving fast enough. So I'm just going to do these to 2s and see if that works better. Okay, so that's working better. This dampening is not helping very much. I'm going to change that back to 0.9. There's a lot of playing with numbers here. Okay, so this is much smoother movement. Maybe too smooth for your taste. Maybe it's perfect. So you notice some of these numbers can get up to 10 or 12 if you keep moving in the same direction. Now maybe that's what you want, maybe it's not. So let's add a cap to it. Let's limit how fast you can move. Okay, so basically, very simple logic here. If the x velocity is greater than whatever you want, we can choose a max velocity. Let's make the max 10. So if it's greater than 10, then we're going to set it to 10. And if it is less than -10, then we're going to set it to -10. Basically, we don't want it to get larger or smaller than the positive or negative. And we'll do the same thing for y. We'll just change all these to y, and y. And we'll put that at the very end. Okay, so now we can move this way, and you'll notice it stops once he gets to 10. So now you can control how fast he moves. Maybe you don't want it to be 10, and maybe you want it to be 5. So I'll do 5, 5, -5, -5, 5, 5, -5, -5. The way I was just going through those numbers real quickly is pressing tab. That takes you to the next input. It's pretty handy. Alright, so now the max is 5. So now he's got a max speed of 5, but he still dampens. He still lightens up. So that looks way smoother, if you ask me. That is pretty cool. Yeah. So that is how you do velocity with a little bit of acceleration. There's some other things you can add to this to make it more realistic. We'll get to those at a later time. One other thing is this is 4 blocks. This is a lot of blocks here, just to cap it off to the edges. I'm going to show you a quick math trick to make it easier. So instead of doing this for the x and this for the y, we're going to make it much simpler. So I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to grab this math block down here at the bottom, do the drop down, and do ABS. ABS stands for absolute value. So if I do a negative number in here, double click it, it's positive now, so it's 5. And if I do a positive number, it's also positive. So it just takes off the negative sign and chops it off. So this can make things really easy, right? So basically what you want to do is we can remove this half of it. So now if x velocity is greater than 5, what we can do is if the absolute value is greater than 5. So if it's -5 or -6, then it will be 6. And 6 is greater than 5, so we want to cap it off. So that will handle both negative and positive numbers. So then in the set, you just want to set it to 5, but you need to choose the right 5, right? So if it's a negative number, you want it to be negative. Now in Scratch, it doesn't look like there's an easy way to choose to just get the sign of a number, and this, when I say sign, I mean like SIGN, right? So the negative sign or the positive sign of a number. There's no block for that, but there's a little hack. What you can do is you can take the absolute value of x, and then here, I'll show you without the variable in there. So you can take the absolute value of a number and divide it by that same number. So that's just going to be 1. But say if it was a negative number, then it's just going to be -1, right? So this is always going to be positive, but it's going to be divided by the negative part. So what we could do is we can do this. This will give you -1 because x velocity, well, it's 0, I guess. So that's kind of weird. But if we set x velocity to 5, oh, come on. Let me stop the script for a second so I can demonstrate this. I set it to 5. It'll be 1, right? So it's positive. If I set it to -5, then it'll be -1. So it's negative. So all we have to do, I'm sorry, this is getting a little bit complicated, is multiply by this by 1. right? So now instead of doing these 2 blocks, we've reduced it to just this. It's a little mathier. It doesn't have to make sense to you if you don't want it to. But this just makes your life easier. You don't have to change so many numbers. You don't have to change, yeah. So basically, instead of 1 here, this will be times 5. And yeah, so now it'll be the exact same thing as we had before. It won't get more or less than 5 or negative 5. One extra step is to create another variable called max speed. Okay, we can just set max speed up here to 5. Let me get rid of all these variables over here. We don't need those. So now that we set max speed at the top, we can replace all of these so we don't have to type in 4 numbers, and we can experiment around better, right? So I know there's a lot of variables, but hey, so now we set the max speed in those spots, does the same exact thing, right? But now that max speed is something we can change, oh, you get a speed boost. Now you can move to 10, right? Okay, max speed is 10. Whoa, you can go faster now. So now you can change that in the code. Okay, I know this is a bit longer video, and the larger part of it was before, and now it's kind of gotten mathy, whatever. I hope you got something from this, and I will see you guys in the next one.